Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Scott Petrie, your instructor for improving teacher and student relationships. Welcome to the Relationship Building Toolkit module. Today, I am going to talk to you about the framework for developmental relationships from the Search Institute. There is a video and also some links to other resources on the very popular 40 developmental assets for those of you who are unfamiliar with this work. The Search Institute has adopted the term developmental assets to describe the broader conception of relationships that is the focus of their research. They've been at this for about 20 years. They've identified 20 actions that make a relationship developmental, and they've organized those actions into a framework that's being examined in a national study that will be released in the fall of 2014. So the 5 factors or domains or categories in the framework are to challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. We will discuss them in greater detail. Then we will discuss how developmental relationships work and describe some of the ways we can create and strengthen developmental relationships. Finally, we'll close with a question you can take to the discussion boards. I look forward to seeing you there. So the first factor in the developmental relationship framework is to express care. And teachers express care by showing that they like their students and want the best for their students. So there are 5 ways that we express this care or can express this care in the classroom. The first is to be present, to pay attention when you're with your students. The second is to be warm. Let them know that you like being with them and express positive feelings towards your students. The third factor is to invest, to commit time and energy into doing things for your students and with your students. The fourth is to show interest, and this is where you make it a priority to understand who your students are and what they care about. And lastly, for expressing care, you need to be dependable. You need to be someone that students can count on and trust. So the next category is to challenge growth. And when you challenge your students to grow, you insist that they continuously improve. So there are 4 ways that you can do this, and the first is to inspire your students. Help them see the future possibilities that they have ahead of them. This could be taking them to college campuses. This could be taking them to future workplaces, work sites, for exposing them to careers. The second factor is to expect. Make it clear that you have high expectations for your students and you want them to live up to their potential. The third factor is to stretch, to recognize your students' thoughts and abilities, but also push them to strengthen them, to increase them. And the fourth in the challenge growth category is to limit. Put some limits on your students. Hold them accountable for appropriate boundaries and rules. This could be code switching with academic language in a secondary classroom. This could be staying in your seat in a middle school or elementary classroom. But it's imperative that students understand the limits you place on them while they're in your class and that you set and hold them accountable to appropriate boundaries. The third element of the developmental relationships framework is to provide support. This is where teachers help their students complete tasks and achieve goals. The first way you do this is by encouraging them, by praising their efforts and their achievements. The second way you provide support is to guide your students, to provide practical assistance and feedback that helps them learn. The third way to provide support is to model, to be an example they can learn from and admire. And finally, the fourth way is to advocate for your students, to stand up for your students when they need support. So now we are on the actual 4th category for sharing power. And when you share power, you have to first give your students respect. You have to take them seriously and treat them fairly. So this means hearing your students' voices and letting them take part share in the decision-making process. The second way is to give voice, to ask for and listen to your students' opinions, and to consider your student input when you make decisions. The third way is to respond, which is where you understand and adjust to the needs of your students, the interests of your students, and the abilities of your students. The fourth way of sharing power is to collaborate. This is where you work with students to accomplish goals and solve problems. So the next domain, the last domain, in expanding possibilities, is where teachers expand their students' horizons and connect them to new opportunities. There are three categories, three practices. One is to explore with your students, to expose them to new ideas, new experiences, and new places. The second is to connect possibilities to your students. Introduce them to people who can help them grow in their chosen field. Expose them to leaders in the fields that they're interested in. The third way to expand possibilities is to navigate. Help them work through the barriers that will prevent them from achieving their goals. So, that in the nutshell is the developmental relationships framework. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is how do developmental relationships work? And they've laid out four ways that these developmental relationships work. One is through interaction. It's a two-way street. The teacher and the student both have to give and take in the relationship. The second is where young people grow the most when they experience multiple developmental relationships in multiple environments. So this can be in community partnerships, this can be in the classroom, this can be in some sort of job, but students are going to gain the most out of these developmental relationships the more they have. The third way developmental relationships work is across cultures and contexts. There are similarities in how these relationships are expressed and how they're nurtured during individual, family, community, church, cultural levels. So the fourth and final way is developmental relationships contribute to many critical outcomes. These include educational performance, behavior choices, perseverance or grit in the face of difficulties and distractions. Teaching your kids how to persevere is very important. Next, how can we create and strengthen developmental relationships? First off, you can start by identifying arrangements in your organization that promote the creation and strengthening of developmental relationships. A lot of teachers also coach athletic teams. I've coached debate, I've coached academic decathlon, I've coached the golf team. When students see you outside of your role as teachers, and they see that you're interested in things that they're interested in, all of a sudden, those kids put themselves on the line, and they'll live and die for you. When other kids are talking trash about you in the classroom, they'll say, no, I've played golf with him. He's a cool guy. Leave him alone. The second way to create and strengthen these developmental relationships is to design activities that put these relationships on the path to becoming permanent relationships. So I always tell my students when I'm conducting research with them, and we've talked earlier in the course about how my students had quick writes about writing about a teacher they had a good relationship with, and the next day writing about a teacher they had a bad relationship with. Well, I would posit that if I did not have good relationships with my students, they simply wouldn't engage in that type of work with me. But since they knew I was teaching this course and they knew I'm interested in teacher-student relationships and how we can improve them, a lot of those kids wrote very deeply and very maturely about the relationships they've had with teachers in the past. Third, identify strategies that strengthen and sustain developmental relationships. In a lot of schools now, we have advisories where the same teacher has the same group of students for several years. This is a great strategy for building assets with your students because you can, especially high school students, they go through a lot of changes in 4 years. They might not care about high school that much in the 9th grade. They may drastically improve in the 10th grade. In the 11th grade, they can have relationships and relationship problems that hold them back. And then all of a sudden in the 12th grade, they're really motivated to learn again. an experienced teacher with a good relationship that has those same students for 4 years understands them and teaches them how to sustain these relationships. Um, Fourth, discover ways to solve problems together. There are a lot of problems that schools have with dress codes and tardies and absences. When you invite the students to brainstorm, when you invite the students to think of ideas to solve these problems, what you're doing is you're saying, hey, you're an important part of our community. We think of you as an equal. We want your input on this. So, 4 ways to create and strengthen developmental relationships. This was just a quick summary of the 40 developmental assets. There are other resources on the website. I encourage you to investigate them. And what I'd like for you to think about, if you have enjoyed this, if you have connected with this material, is think about how can you incorporate elements from the developmental relationship framework, or in short, the 40 developmental assets, into your classroom practices. And I know these prompts are hard to respond. We have a wide variety of educators, kindergarten teachers, elementary school teachers, middle school teachers, high school teachers, and even college professors taking this course. But what I want to hear from, what I'm looking for on the discussion board is what is resonating with you? What are the important elements from this framework that you think you can incorporate into your practice in your classroom, and how can we help you do that? Thank you very much for listening. I'm so glad you're participating in the course. I will see you next time on the Canvas Network.